Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Movie Chats. And today we have a special guest. We have Jonathan Oster with us. Jonathan is the director of the movie Jane's Not Here that is premiering at the Dance with Films LA. It's been out on the 21st, right?
Correct. That's correct. Last Sunday.
We had the opportunity to do an early screening of the movie, and we were not disappointed, as we were saying before we started recording. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. We're having a few questions about the movie. So the first one that I want to ask you is, so how did the movie come about? Can you trace it back to a single event that started it all saying, I'm doing this?
Yeah, it's something that I kind of wish that I could just say, it was all me and take sole credit. But actually, my sister had this wonderful idea. She came to me with the core
Oh,
concept for the film. And for your viewers who don't know, the film follows a young woman who wakes up from a coma following a devastating accident.
yeah.
And, upon waking up, she's just consumed by memories of her husband and son who are nowhere to be found and whom she's told don't exist. So it's a very mysterious premise. And again, my sister came to me with it, and growing up, we always loved watching movies like that. We loved watching movies
Mm,
that have some grand mystery that you kind of have to figure out alongside the protagonist. You're given puzzle pieces that you have to assemble along
yeah.
with the main character. So I wish I could take sole credit, but she came to me with kind of this wonderful mysterious concept, and I built the entire script around that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you did the synopsis like a lot better than I could have. So thanks for that. um,
I've had some practice, so.
good. So I read that you wrote the script when you unfortunately were grieving your father, and then you started shooting the movie when your wife or your partner was expecting your daughter, and then you edited when she was born the first month of her life. That's correct?
Correct. Yeah, it was a lot of interesting life events happening kind of all at once.
Quite a bit of
And
an
yeah, it
emotional
was,
journey, yeah.
yeah,
Do you think that has
100%.
changed your perspective as you were doing the movie, or no, you had like the very good idea from A to B from start to finish?
I think I had a pretty good idea from A to B from start to finish. If anything, I don't think these events necessarily
Mm,
influenced anything in the story. For instance, the birth of my daughter, but it reinforced things. Because
yeah.
again, kind of at the core of Jane's Not Here is, it's this idea that a mother's love or a parent's love for their child is just kind of this immovable, the most powerful force in the universe, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that was certainly reinforced by me having my own child. Me
Mm,
having my own child, having those experiences with my child, and watching my wife with, our child. So I don't think, these things that happen necessarily influenced anything from a writing perspective. But, all of the ideas that were there were certainly reinforced by these things that happen in real life.
that's very amazing because the parenting moments feel very real. That you wrote the
Yeah.
script before becoming a father is actually quite interesting. That you really hit the nail on the head for that.
And that's because, I mean, I'm certainly giving my sister a lot of credit, but she
Mm,
absolutely deserves it. But a lot of kind of when I was writing it and I was writing those relationships, I also based a lot of those interactions and those moments between Jane and her son on the interactions that I observed with my sister and my nephew. So my sister and her son. They've always been very charming, and they've always had this very great banter, and I got to witness firsthand how kids at that age kind of behave, and they're very
yeah.
funny, or they can be very funny and very kind of wicked and devilish a little bit, and very
Mm,
charming. So yeah, again, I had my sister to thank for that because, I had a kind of firsthand experience, watching that.
nice.
Yeah, we've both got two kids each. So we, as soon as while I was watching this, I'm like, yeah, this is definitely a real parent watching, talking about real kids. This is exactly how kids are.
I I appreciate it.
Did you do any research on coma patients and with or medical professions? We're wondering how much of Jane's experience came from real cases versus dramatic storytelling. It felt really real to us.
Oh, I so appreciate it. We absolutely did some research on coma patients and things like that. This is obviously such a unique kind of story that there was nothing I could kind of read about that kind of looked like this specifically, this story that happens with Jane. But we certainly looked a lot about, I like to use the example, for instance, of when she's waking up in the hospital for the first time, and she's kind of very panicking, and she's very loud, and she's kind of getting very heated, and the doctors are, they're prescribing her a certain medicine that would be
Yeah,
safe for her to take after she just woke up from a coma, but something that will help kind of knock her out, help her, go back to sleep without being dangerous. We did a lot of research in terms of things like that, and
mhm.
yeah, we wanted it to feel as real as possible because, again, the premise for the film is slightly surreal, right? I mean, a woman who
Yeah,
kind of wakes up with memories of a completely different life, but we really wanted to ground that as much as possible in our reality, down to those kind of medication choices, and then also just and I'm sure we'll get to this a little bit, but things in the production as well, the way we filmed it, the way we
yeah,
shot it and lit it and everything like that.
yeah, 100%. I'm gonna touch a bit on the cast. So Amelia Barr, she's fantastic as Jen, but Steve Mallers as well gets so much humanity in Brady. I mean, the picture that I have is a scene that was truly emotional when he's in the hospital and he talks to her
Oh,
after she did something, truly awful to herself. Tell us a bit more about the casting. Where did you find the actors? What was the moment where you say, yes, this is my Jen. Yes, this is my Brady. I really want to hear about that.
yeah.
A- a- Absolutely. And firstly, I so love that you have that background right now because that's actually probably my favorite scene in the film. I think
Mm,
that scene, without going into spoilers or anything, but it's just this interaction or this conversation rather between Steve, who plays Brady, and Jane, or Amelia, who plays Jane. It's this conversation between them in a hospital, and I think it just really captures the very core and the very essence of the film. Um, but yeah, I mean, Steve was just amazing as well. Amelia is the main character, and she's what makes the movie really just she's the heart of it, right? But
mm,
Steve is so amazing as well. And for both of them, they're both Minneapolis based. The entire crew as well as myself, Minneapolis based, and we shot in
yeah,
Minnesota. I think at the time of shooting, Amelia was Minnesota and New York, so she was kind of going back and forth. And I just found them on. I found them both on a few of the local talent agency websites. They were
yeah,
represented by agencies here. And yeah, when I met Steve, I mean, when I met both of them, I just kind of knew pretty immediately that they were my actors. I had met some other people as well, but they were just so clearly the correct people to play the roles. And yeah, we met and kind of we had some rehearsals, and they met, and I mean they were just perfect as brother and sister. I mean
Oh,
yeah,
right.
not only did they kind of
Yeah.
look alike, right? They look very similar. They look like they could be brother and sister, but I mean they both
mm,
have kind of some of the same mannerisms, and they have the same kind of wit, and are both highly intelligent and highly friendly, and all of that. But yeah, you bringing up Steve in particular, I'm sure he'll really like that, and he just does an amazing job in the film. And as much as the film is kind of about throwing the character of Jane into an impossible situation where she's remembering things that no one else remembers, but she's positive that they're true, right? It's an impossible
yeah,
situation for her. It's equally impossible for him, right? Because he's completely torn between the sister he knows, has known, and the sister who's here in the present in the film right now, who's asking him to believe all of these things that kind of, he has firsthand knowledge that, he's never really seen before.
yeah.
So I think Steve just does such an amazing job capturing that, and yeah, I got lucky with these actors. I really did.
Yeah. Yeah. He gave me goosebumps at times for just, especially the scene with what Anthony's got in his background. That scene is just, oh my God, how amazing you must have been behind the camera, just going, I wrote these characters and they're playing out everything that I wanted it to be. Just, I
Yeah,
couldn't imagine how you must have felt for that.
it was thrilling. I was so. I mean, I couldn't have imagined it would have been that good, So I was just so happy, so happy.
Ah, yeah. On their kind of their relationship between each other, because obviously you've touched on your relationship with your sister. We just really appreciated how authentic their relationship was. And Brady was obviously incredibly patient despite everything he's been through. Was that relationship inspired by your own relationship with your sister?
I'm absolutely sure that it was. I mean, I think when you're writing things, whatever kind of life experiences you have and past experiences and current relationships or whatever tend to seep into the script, right? So, um, no specific kind of interactions were, between them were influenced by, you know, any kind of specific scenarios between my sister and I. But yeah, I mean, that kind of warmth, right? That kind of warmth and that kind of just unconditional love and always caring. I mean, my sister and I are incredibly close, And so, yeah, I absolutely like to think that it was partly influenced by the relationship that I have with my sister, how could it not be, when you have
Of
a
course.
very good
Yeah.
relationship with your sibling and you're writing about that? I absolutely think so.
We're going to touch on your filmmaking choices. There's subtle blur, there's putting colors in black and white, and then there's the sound design where the dialogue becomes muffled when Jane's shutting the world out. Were those techniques planned in the script, or did they kind of evolve during production?
Um, you know, I think it was really a combination. I mean, you mentioned specifically the muffling, for instance. So there's a couple different times that happens throughout the film, and I think some of them were planned in the script and some of them weren't necessarily. So as an example, there's a scene when she's in a hospital garden with Dr. Smith, and she's talking with him, and he's kind of getting her up to date on how she got into the coma, and yeah, she just kind of starts to. Completely zone out and all of the sound and everything fades out and just begins muffling, as you say. And that was in the script. But later on there's a scene where she's kind of back at home and she's sitting at the diner table or the dinner table, and she something similar happens again, where she's getting a flashback to what caused the accident, and she starts kind of fading everything out. And I don't think that was in the script. I think really what we were trying to do there was just trying to find really kind of interesting ways of just showing her PTSD,
Yeah.
um, and ways that weren't necessarily shown before in a ton of other things. We thought it was a really kind of cool and unique thing to do. Yeah, can I keep going on about the sound design, or
Go
do
for
you
it.
have another specific?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, so even down to the score and stuff, we really I composed the music for the film as well.
Mm.
And that's also something that I really wanted for the most part to keep the music almost like an extension of the sound design. I
Yeah.
never wanted it to be kind of, distracting or take away from the visuals or take away from the performances. So it was always meant to accompany. And that was really fun because, I worked on shorts and things like that in the past where the music tended to be much more kind of melodic or kind of have a theme. And this was really fun just because I was working a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. I was really trying to make the music more like sound design. So that was a lot of fun for me. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned things like the shots as well and the blurs and things like that. We really tried to approach the film in a naturalistic kind of way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I was saying before about it's a surreal premise, and we very much wanted to incorporate it into the real world, right? With authentic dialogue and authentic relationships. And we also really wanted to do that with how it was filmed. We wanted to do it minimalistic, so it kind of just looks like you're a person observing people having conversations, right? Just to help really ground it in our reality. Yeah, does that make sense? Sorry, I could go on and on and
No,
on about it because I
Yeah,
have
no,
lots of thoughts.
100%.
we love hearing it.
I love talking about it. So
It's so good. There is one especially shots at the very beginning when she's with Tommy and they're walking, and there is the sun that is coming and it obscures or make it very bright on Tommy's face. And I thought it was something like it's overshadowing that is he real, is he not real? Was that a happy accident that you kept in the film, or did you specifically want to shot that with that covering his face?
I absolutely wanted to shoot it like that. Yeah, I
Nice.
wanted to shoot it like that, and I love little kind of foreshadowing, kind of mystical things like that. So
Mhm.
yeah, good catch. That was intentional, and yeah, I do just want to really quick say that the director of photography, Bella de Mesquita, just one of my oldest friends actually,
Yeah.
just did a phenomenal job. Just did an absolutely phenomenal job, really making it feel authentic and real, and still pretty. Still really good looking.
Nice. I, I want to go back to the story. So throughout watching the film, I kept on changing my mind. I thought at the beginning that she was delusional because she was coming out of coma and she has dreamt the entire thing. Then I thought that she was massively gaslit, but I was wondering how that was going to be possible. But I was hooked. I keep flip-flopping and I was hooked. Did you find it difficult to find the right balance to keep the audience not certain, but also not losing them?
It's a great question. And yes, super, I think it's super difficult kind of finding that right balance, right? Because, yeah, you want to, you want to intrigue the audience enough to continue. You want them to be really intrigued and interested in what's going on and engaged. Um, but you also want to withhold information without confusing them, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really delicate balance. Yeah, and it's funny what you're saying about, there were certain moments where you thought that she was, being kind of large scale gaslit and you weren't sure. And it's funny because I even think one of the interesting things about the film is truly it's kind of it's an interesting hybrids of genres almost, where at its core, it's kind of this tiny, character drama about a mother
Mm,
who's just longing to see her kid, right? And who's trying to get back to her kid. But then wrapped around that is kind of this, almost suspense thrillery kind of things at times, and wrapped
yep.
around that is this grand mystery. Um, so yeah, I'm glad it kind of kept you on your toes and you weren't exactly sure and you were kind of going back and forth about what was going on and yeah, that was very much the intention and I hope and I think we did it in such a way where the audience just is really engaged to go along with the ride and isn't confused but is instead really intrigued to figure out what is going on.
Yeah, 100%. And we reviewed a few, let's say, psychological thrillers on the channel, and often they manage to build up a very good setup, but the payoff is just not there. But here it actually really landed emotionally for both of
I
us.
thank you so
I had to
much.
say,
Thank you so much.
yeah.
Yeah.
I actually shed a tear, like at
Yeah. Oh,
at
same.
the final tear
Ah,
at the final scene. That was so good.
Oh,
Were you always confident that this ending was gonna pay off the way that it did?
I think so. I mean, I think I would, that at least that's always the hope, right? But I think so, and I think again, without getting too much into spoilers, those words are spoken kind of to words Tommy at the end of the movie that are spoken at the beginning of the movie as well, right?
Yeah.
And what do we do when we fall down? Lift our booties off the ground, and I thought that those kind of words of encouragement are the only thing that could kind of, those words were the only kind of thing that could really bring her kid back, right? Trying to think of the best way. It seemed like the logical, choice that
Mm,
she would utter those words again that she did from the beginning of the movie that really are always comforting to her kid. And beyond that, I always knew that it had to end with some amount of closure, but it couldn't end with a completely definitive kind of answer, right?
yep.
Because again, it's a surreal kind of premise, and something like that can never fully be explained, right? I mean, it's like the question as well of what happens after we die, right? It's
Yeah.
something that it just can't fully be explained for us, right? So. Yeah, I knew that the ending also, while still bringing about closure, had to have a certain layer of ambiguity, right? And that's also my favorite kind of movie and has been, growing up and watching movies throughout the years. Is those kind of movies where, one person is going to have a different interpretation than the person over here. And hopefully people will just be pondering it in a good way, after the credits
Yeah.
roll. So
100%.
um, yeah. So my next question will be two parts of what you've
mhm.
just spoken about. But the first part is the sequence involving Diana, the author's mother, was incredibly emotional. It's almost shifts the film from a mystery into something more human. What did that scene mean to you?
Well, I mean, it was just amazing. Again, similar to the watching the scene of Steve and Amelia in the hospital. This was another scene that was just amazing to watch. Because the whole time I was kind of thinking to myself, wow, I really got lucky with these actors.
Yeah.
Because they just completely transformed. It's always amazing when you have something written on a script, but then you have just great people who can take that off, not just reading it, but actually fully live it and breathe it. And obviously I'm not an actor, so that's just something that I'm so unfamiliar with, and I'm always just amazed by it. And it was also very kind of reassuring because I think that maybe we filmed that scene, maybe that was like the third or the fourth shooting day. And, we had roughly 25
Wow.
shooting days. Yeah, we had roughly 25 shooting days. And I think it's always just really nice for everyone, myself included, when you kind of capture some of the magic of the film that early on, because it's
Mm.
really like,
Right?
oh, we know what we're doing. This is,
Yeah.
Oh,
we
wow.
have a long trek ahead, but we're already getting to some really good stuff, and we have much more to come. So I think it was just super rewarding, and
Mm.
that's again one of my favorite scenes in the film because, as you say, it does really change it from a mystery to back to this almost bittersweet kind of it's sweet. There's a lot of darkness in this movie, right? There's a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
darkness and sadness, but there's also just a lot of sweet things as well.
That must have been just so incredible for that actress, Amelia, to just like, she's only been living in this role for like 3 or 4 days,
Mhm.
but the
That she pulls that
character's been
off.
living in this
Yeah.
the character's been living in this world for like 6 months by this stage. That's mind blowing to me.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Oh wow. All right, and this will probably be without trying to spoil the film. Do you have a what's next for Jane in your mind? Is there something that you'd like? Where's Jane in 6 months?
You know, again, a wonderful question, but usually when I'm asked, I always give the same answer, and that's just that as soon as I answer that question, that becomes the answer, right? Because I'm the
Yep,
director. And
Yeah.
what I love is when people have different ideas about what happens next.
yep.
So I certainly have my ideas. What I will say kind of definitively is that it's a, a happy ending.
Oh,
It's a happy ending.
100%.
I don't know, you know it's a happy ending. I think the character, of Jane, she really went through some great trauma and hardships throughout the movie, and it was all worth it because she got to that point at the end, and
Yeah.
she's reunited, and it's a happy ending.
Oh, it was just so heartwarming. Just like, so we won't spoil it, but just to know that what she's going through made sense. It's just like there was a, yeah, her whole
She
journey.
wasn't totally crazy, right?
Correct. Yeah.
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 Nice. So we just need to wait for the sequel. Jen
There
still
we
has
go.
it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Jane's not here. Jane's not here reloaded. Coming.
100%. So I read that you made the movie with a crew of only 5 people. Is that correct? That's
Yeah, I mean, I think we
incredible.
had, I think in total there were 9 people or so, but that
Mm.
was through post-production and through production, and people were alternating. On any given day of filming, that's right, we had 5 people, including myself. Sometimes that was 3 people, sometimes that was 4 people, but it was really small, and it kind of had to be because it's, an indie film with a very indie budget, right?
Yeah.
But I also really liked that because I think we were able to all, get a lot closer and the set was more intimate. And, we also
Mm.
just had to be, I think, more creative in some ways. We had to be more
Yeah.
creative with our limitations. So,
That's
Um,
awesome.
on that budget talk, some of the locations, like you've got your hospital scenes, the police station, even the train crash sequence with the aftermath, they look far bigger than what you would expect from a small independent film. How did you pull that off?
I think it was just we were all incredibly passionate about making the movie, and I mean, I think any filmmaker would probably say that, right? But I think, as I said, we just had to get really creative, right? So for instance, we reached out to, and actually one of the most difficult parts of the film was actually the pre-production process and securing locations. And
Yeah.
we reached out to a lot of places, for instance, for the hospital, right? We reached out to just tons and tons and tons of hospitals and got no's and no's and rejections and rejections. And finally we found a simulation center at St. Catherine's University in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And
Nice.
yeah, the train was another example where we were kind of like, oh, how are we going to do this? And then, originally we were like, well, let's rent a party bus, at least for the interior shots. A party bus can have a similar interior to a modern day passenger train, right? And then I think
Hmm.
we started to do that. And then the person who was in charge of the rentals was like, oh, well, this is what you're doing. Okay, well, we actually have connections to some actual, train companies or whatever in
Oh,
Minnesota. And so we used a really awesome, train company. Um, but yeah, in terms of working within that budget, I think that we just had a lot of kind of meticulous planning, and we were just determined to do so, and when you're determined to do so, you just do it. You work with all the limitations that you have and you just do it.
Yeah. Finally, we're probably wrapping up. We'll probably ask a few last bit of questions, but where can audiences find Jane's Not Here, and what's next for you?
Yeah, well, yeah, firstly, hopefully in a state, coming to you, or in a country coming to you soon, we're right now going through the festival route. So, Dances with Films was our world premiere, and we hope to just be continuing going to festivals. We're going to be hearing, word back soon about those, but hopefully, film festivals kind of around the States and in other countries as well. And then, after that, and I'll certainly reach out with you with this information, hopefully on streaming services after that. But it's
Nice.
it's still, it just had its world premiere and it's still quite early on. So, we don't know all the information yet. But as soon as we know more information about where you can view it next, I'll make sure to get that to you guys.
Oh, beautiful. Thank
Awesome.
you.
And in terms of what's next, um, I always have things up my sleeve and things that I want to do. In particular, right now, I am actually in production on a short film, and it's very different from Jane's Not Here. It's called Deeper, and it follows a young man with kind of deep psychological trauma, who turns to an AI therapy chatbot for therapeutic help, or psychiatric help rather. And it's very topical to a lot of the things you're hearing in the news right now, which doesn't always go great. But it's
Yep.
also just a really good story, and it's full of great performances. Again, one of them actually is Steve, who plays Brady in Jane's Not Here. And it's just a really different thing. It's fast paced, it's energetic, and again, it's a short film. So that's something that I'm really excited to finish and hopefully get out there.
I love it. I want to watch that.
Uh,
It's
I
relevant.
promise is I promise I'll share it with you, when it's ready.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Beautiful. All right. Well, Anthony, is there anything else you'd like to ask? Is there anything that Jonathan, you'd like to kind of that we haven't touched on yourself?
No, just I just want to thank you all so much again. Yeah, I just want to thank you guys. Thank you for having me. Thank you for watching the movie. I mean, I can't tell you how much it means as a indie filmmaker. It really means the world when you guys watch the movie. So I really appreciate it.
That was
We,
great.
we're just thrilled to be part of this journey with you, and just be able to sit down with you and ask you these questions from
My
across
pleasure. My pleasure.
across the world. It's Sunday morning here in Adelaide and Australia for us, and I think it's still Saturday afternoon for you guys, or isn't it?
Saturday afternoon. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. All right. Well,
Before we
thanks.
wrap up, I just had like one last question. You mentioned a few films that you were, watching as a family, and you really like to piece things together. Can you give us maybe a couple that were just your top movies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even though they're probably not the same genre, even though the thing that I love about Jane's Not Here is it really is kind of a hybrid of genres. But Prisoners is an absolutely wonderful movie
Nice.
by Denis Villeneuve. Well, I can never
Yeah.
pronounce his name, but
Yeah,
it's
Danny
a great
Villeneuve.
movie.
Yeah,
It's a great movie. Likewise, just plenty of Nolan movies. I mean, in particular, I'm a big fan of Memento.
Memento.
Big fan
Yep.
of Memento. But we also, went back when we were making the movie and we watched like, Following his first one just to see what he was able to do for such a small budget. And
Yes.
and it's just amazing to see, successful directors' first works and see how
Yeah.
kind of they enter the arena. It's always just such a wonderful and encouraging and inspiring thing. So yeah, Prisoners and Memento and Following.
Actually,
Nice.
do you know who I thought? Because you obviously did the composing of this film, it had early John Carpenter vibes for me, because obviously
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
he composed Assault on Precinct 13
Mhm.
and Halloween.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So he directed
Halloween.
and composed, and it's just like I can see kind of that kind of future for you.
That's a giant compliment. I can't. All I can do is say thank you to that. That's
Yeah,
a huge compliment. I mean, John Carpenter is amazing. You know.
yeah. All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll obviously put links in our bio on our YouTube channel to see where you can watch this when it comes out. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks John for joining us as well. We'll see you all on our next episode.